Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again today. My name is Lori Marie Pashota, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mental Health Association of Rhode Island. We know that COVID-19 is a mental health crisis as much as it is a medical emergency and a financial disaster. People might be feeling very alone right now, perhaps anxious, perhaps depressed, and we know that this may be affecting our ability to get a good night's sleep. And sleep is so important for mood and mental clarity and overall health. And so I thought maybe it would be helpful if we could talk with a local expert who could give us some advice about how to get a good night's sleep right now, some pro tips, if you will. And so that is our subject matter for today. We are very, very lucky because today we're joined by Dr. Mary Carskadon, one of the most prominent American sleep researchers. Dr. Carskadon is a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Human Behavior here at Brown University's Warren Alpert School of Medicine. She's also the director of the Sleep and Chronobiology Research Lab at Radley Hospital, and she's considered to be an expert on sleep and circadian rhythms during childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood. Welcome, Dr. Carskadon. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you will, please take it from here.
Thank you. Let me get my screen sharing going. So, welcome to everyone. I hope you can stay awake for a little while longer this afternoon. I had a couple disclosures. I don't have any conflicts of interest, but probably more important for today's topic, I'm really not a clinician, or I don't play one on TV, but I do have some knowledge about sleep, and I talk to some of my clinical psychology and psychiatry friends who do sleep disorders medicine. So I've got some pro tips. But since I am more a teacher / professor than a clinician, I thought I'd start out with you all. Why is my slideshow going? Talking a little bit more about what sleep is and how it's controlled by biological processes, and then talk about sleep hygiene, and then, well, what more is needed now that we don't live in our real world anymore. Before I go further, I just want to ask, is my cursor arrow visible? Okay, great. So, what is sleep? This is a way of thinking about it that I share with my students. So it's a regulated behavior. So it's not just that thing that happens when we shut off our lights and close our eyes. It's really a biologically regulated behavior, which makes its characteristics predictable in most instances. And we talk about some of the things that you want to think about, or that any organism that sleeps shows. So behavioral quiescence. When you're asleep, you're not active and about. Typically, there's a species-specific posture. So by and large, except if you're a student in my classes nodding off your desk, you're lying down in bed. But other species have other postures and places to sleep. You're harder to get your attention when you're asleep, but not impossible, because if I make enough of a noise, you'll wake right up. And the other thing that speaks again to this regulated behavior is if I take it away, it comes back stronger and more efficiently. So we'll talk more about that when we talk about the regulatory factors. So most sleep people, and this is a really good way, I think, to conceptualize sleep, especially if it's a challenge for you. These two biological processes work hand in glove to help us sleep right. So one we call process S, and I think of it as sleep pressure. So on the graph over here, you see 7 a.m. waking up, 11 p.m. falling asleep. And while we're awake, sleep pressure is building. When we fall asleep, we have a recovery process and the sleep pressure falls. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then process C is a little simple as well. It's simply the daily oscillation of the pressure to sleep that's controlled by your circadian timing system. So let's go a little deeper into process S, the sleep pressure system. I want to start by showing you what we call a sleep hypnogram. So this is a diagram of this is a normal night of sleep in a healthy, probably this is a 16-year-old. And if you look at the graph on this axis, we see the different kinds of sleep laid out. One major category is called non-REM sleep, and the second is REM sleep, which you can think of that as largely as dreaming sleep. And down on this axis, we have time across the night. So the down arrow was bedtime, lights out at 11 p.m., and lights were turned on at 7:30. So this hypnogram just follows the sleep process across the night. There are a couple of important features of this to think about. One is that there is a cycle. So if you look at these black areas, that's REM sleep. And you can see a cycle between the two kinds of sleep goes through the night. So that's part of the predictability of sleep. If you're doing it, you have this cycle, and it's about 90 minutes long in adults. One of the other features I want to point out to you, though, which will come into focus as we talk about process S a little more, is you can see these REM sleep dark lines get longer and longer across the night. But these slow wave sleeps here, this deep sleep here, is longer at the beginning of the night and gets shorter the deeper you go into the night. And the importance of that is that this slow wave sleep is actually the process against which the mathematical models for our sleep pressure system are developed. And the slow wave comes from the EEG pattern during sleep. So this graph just shows you when we're awake and relaxed, we have this sort of, this is eyes closed. So we have this pattern of very regular waves that are about 8 to 10 cycles per second. As we fall asleep, the brain waves change a little bit, and the deeper sleep is, so here you can see us over here, the different changes occur that identify that. Here, this stage N3, deep sleep, is sort of the combination of 3 and 4 on this graph. And then in REM sleep, our brain waves look actually more like they do when we're awake with our eyes open. So our brain is much more active. But remember, process S modeled from slow wave sleep. So the model then takes this slow wave sleep and looks at how much and how strong it is early in the night, and then later in the night, and then later in the night. And you can see, that this process is weakening the deeper you go into sleep. That's because this is that process that builds up when we're awake and then wanes with sleep, and is part of how we recover across the night. So again, while we're awake, it builds up. When we sleep, it recovers. So let's look at this process with a little more action going on. Here, the blue part of our graph shows you that normal sleep, So sleep pressure builds up, it's 7 a.m. And by 11 p.m., it's at a level that's very generous to help you fall asleep. And then it ebbs across the night. Well, what happens if we don't go to sleep at 11 p.m. this night, but stay awake another 24 hours? So you can see that this sleep pressure system keeps building up more and more and more and more and more. And it gets, as a result, it gets harder and harder to stay awake. One of the interesting things about the way sleep is regulated is it's not necessarily all or none. And so this process doesn't build up in a linear fashion. In other words, it's not going up and up and up and up acutely. It has this curve to it. And that's how anybody is able to pull an all-nighter. Because if it were going up and up and up like this, the pressure would just develop way too fast. So at any rate, the longer you're awake, the greater the pressure to sleep. And again, when you sleep, the pressure dissipates. Now I want to just point out this green section for you, because this is one that comes into play when we talk about having better sleep and improving our sleep. So if instead of staying up from 7 to 11, we take a nap, shown here from 6 to 8 p.m., look what happens. Well, we start recovering, and that's reducing that sleep pressure, which is part of what helps us to fall asleep. And so by 11 p.m., if we wanted to go to sleep then, it would be a big challenge because we don't have adequate sleep pressure helping to push us over that cliff. So it's important to think about these things, especially if you're challenged to get a good night's sleep. So let's look at the flip side of this, the circadian timing system. So the circadian timing system is that biological clock, is another way to think of it. But I want you, while you're looking at this screen, think about this image that you're seeing, and I hope you all recognize, you know, the United States and South America, Africa, Australia, and Asia. Can you think what's wrong with this? I don't know if you all can raise your hand or want to text, but what's wrong with this is we never are like this. We are never the whole planet in daylight at the same time, nor is the whole planet in darkness at the same time. And indeed, there's many, many places around the globe where we're never in darkness, because all of these bright sections you see here are the lights that humans make. So this is electricity. It's interesting. I love this image because I think it's interesting to look at all the places that aren't lit up during the nighttime. Of course, including the oceans, but you can even see the island chains and so forth. So what I show this for is to remind us that humans are diurnal. We are built and we are evolved to be awake in the daylight and not the darkness. And so really, as the globe spins, you see that we go from daylight to darkness. We're supposed to be awake in daylight and asleep in darkness. And most of us do that. Although, again, as we are going through this pandemic with the lockdowns, some people are really struggling to keep that schedule. Now, so before we go on, just a reminder that our circadian system affects many systems. And this is just a cartoon with some of them pointed out. And just to highlight this, we are diurnal. So all the things you see on the top part of this image are those things that humans want to be doing and doing well in daylight. All of the things you see down here, deepest sleep, lowest body temperature, and so forth, are things, and suppression of your bowel movements, things we do best and need to do best at night. So the circadian biologists actually found the clock in the brain. So there is a place, there's an anatomical location in the brain. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus. Actually, it's a paired nucleus, and it sits right here. Now, those of you who know or don't know about brain anatomy, it gets its name because it's sitting right above the optic chiasm. That's where the optic nerve crosses over and is part of our visual pathway. But it's known now that there are direct connections from our retina to this important time-giving center. And it's really that connection is, as you'll see from how light can affect our circadian rhythms, is important to remember, because light coming through our eyes into this tiny little part of the brain is probably the single, not probably, is the single most important signal to our circadian clock. But the scientists have now learned there's not just this one clock. For 20 years, that was pretty much what was thought. Along the way, and acknowledged, I guess, internationally a couple of years ago, was the discovery of the molecular mechanism that drives the clock. And that discovery and description was awarded a Nobel Prize in 2018. So it's now been shown that these tiny little clocks are located not just in cells in this brain region, but also in cells in other organs in our bodies. So lungs and liver and gut and so forth. And so the role of the central clock is really one that coordinates all these other rhythms and coordinates our rhythms in relation to the 24-hour day. So this clock in our hypothalamus plays a huge role in keeping our timing going the way it should. Just to show you some of the outputs of this circadian clock, you can see in this diagram here, the pink showing where nighttime is. And these are true. These graphs are what happens even if we are not asleep. So it is a day-night thing. So the first one you see is cortisol, which is pretty much low in the daytime and early in the night, and rises. You could think of this as in anticipation of waking up. So you want to be synchronized to this rhythm because it's part of what helps you wake up in the morning. And here our body temperature is lower in the night, which if you stayed up, if you pulled that all-nighter, you may have experienced as, gee, it got really cold here, but it's not cold. The temperature may be the same. It's your body that's different. And the plasma melatonin, which we can also measure in saliva, so the melatonin rhythm is also one that's important and is used commonly as a marker of our circadian rhythm. And this is a rhythm that's high during sleep and pretty much non-existent in the daytime. So I know there's a lot of information and I hope I can pull it together for you when we talk about how things are put together. Before we get there though, I want to just say a little bit back to this issue of light. So again, I emphasize that this clock is sitting right there where it gets direct input from our retinas. And it's not input of the images that we see, it's input of the light levels that your retina sees. And the light affects the timing of our clock. It can change the rhythms simply by when the light occurs. This is a fancy graph just showing that graphically, and I don't want to go through all those details, but basically, fundamentally, if we get bright light in the evening, which is demonstrated here, it will push us later, will push our rhythms later. So think about that, you know, if you're staying up late, if you're reading your book or watching that show or on your social media late in the evening, it will push your timing for sleep later and make it harder to sleep. And the opposite occurs when you get light in the morning. It pulls your rhythms earlier. And this is why, as you'll see, people, your clinician, folks who are trying to get you to sleep better are going to emphasize getting light in the morning and avoiding light in the evening to try to keep you and your timing of your rhythms at the correct phase. And one of the reasons that this balance is so important is that most humans, if you left us alone, pretended we were the rats, put us in a cage with a running wheel and no light ever, our rhythms would go longer than 24 hours. So it takes a little boost to pull in the morning in this part of the system to pull our rhythms back to 24 hours. We haven't yet to put any of our participants in a box with a running wheel and turn the lights off. Humans don't do well in those circumstances. So let's just put these two systems together to give you a sense of how this plays out, because the systems are functionally independent, but they are coordinated, and that how well they are coordinated speaks to how well we're able to sleep with these biological things in the background. So if you look at the top here, this is process S, and it's being shown as, this is 9 a.m., 9 p.m., 9 a.m., being shown as getting the load getting heavier and heavier and heavier the longer you stay awake. Process C is shown here as building across the day in a different direction, because a big part of what our circadian timing system does for our sleep is this alerting signal. So if you think about it, if all we had was process S, building and building and building across the day, it would be hard to stay awake at all towards bedtime. What lets us stay awake in the evening is this pushback from our circadian timing system that puts an alerting signal here. So you see here, alertness level has this little dip in it in the middle of the day when this builds up, before this builds up. And then by here, both systems contribute to the turnaround that allows us to sleep. And one of the signals that the brain pushes out, that, as I mentioned before, we use to gauge the timing of the circadian system, is the melatonin signal, which I show to you here. Again, melatonin low in the daytime, builds up, and is a signal that's sort of gating the good time to fall asleep. And you can see that's consistent with this fall off of the alerting system from the circadian rhythm. So some people say that melatonin and the turning on of melatonin, let's see that again, the turning on of melatonin here in the evening is opening the window for us to fall asleep and feel so happy doing it. But I just wanted to point out that even with all this biology in the background, sleep timing and the amount of sleep people get is highly variable. And this, one of my favorite images shows the sleep patterns of some notables across history. And I know you can't read it, but let me mention a few. So Beethoven, you may be able to recognize this image, here had a schedule from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Balzac, who you see here, he's the early sleeper, sleeping from 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. and then having a nap in the morning, later in the morning. Maya Angelou, in this orange stripe here, similar to Beethoven, maybe a little less sleep. Who was another notable? Freud, since this is a mental health presentation, there's Freud. Not getting as much sleep, a shorter sleeper, 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. He is not this guy taking the nap out here. That is Darwin, whose nighttime sleep is midnight to 7 a.m. and then with a nap in the middle of the afternoon. I think that might be my preferred schedule if I had nothing else going on. It certainly was when I was a graduate student. So the point here, though, is success in life doesn't necessarily correlate 100% with when or how much you sleep. And so I put this in just to sort of maybe take a little bit of an edge off, I think, some of the messages that we hear about how big a deal sleep is, which is not to say sleep isn't a big deal, but there are variations that can be okay. So we get then to what the sleep docs tell us. And before COVID-19, there are a lot of sleep hygiene tips. So keep a regular schedule, weekdays and weekends both. Put your clocks where you can't see them. And what I figured out I can do, even if I put my clocks away, is Alexa, what time is it? Alexa, what time is it?
The time is 4:36 p.m.
Yeah, so.
You've enjoyed your Thursday.
Oh, thanks, Alexa. So that's, so we could get around that. So keep your mouth closed. Don't take those daytime naps. Remember, that's gonna pull down your sleep pressure and make it harder to fall asleep. You need to be in a place that's conducive to sleep. For most people, remember, humans are diurnal animals. And so our sleep is best in the nighttime when it is dark and quiet. And it also helps if your bedroom is cool. Things that can help are wearing eye shades and putting baffles in your ear or creating some white noise. If you don't have, if where you live doesn't make it otherwise easy to do this. And I always say these things, and then I think outside of our bubble of, Western industrial society, or even into the bubble of urban city life and the challenges of being not only in a dark, quiet, and cool environment, but in a safe environment. All of those things are things, if you can control them, it will help. Plan for some wind down time. Don't just, sit on playing your Wii or doing your workout and then boom, go to bed. We need time to wind down to sleep. Set a curfew for all of your electronic media as part of that. So shut down before bedtime by an hour or so, which is really hard. And then, all of these substances affect sleep. So the conventional wisdom is don't drink caffeine within 6 to 8 hours of your bedtime. Don't drink alcohol more than maybe one standard drink within 3 or 4 hours of your bedtime. Caffeine is an alerting stimulant. Alcohol, although it does help you ease into sleep, if you have too much, it disrupts your sleep and makes it lighter. And nicotine is also an alerting substance. So now, though, that we're living in COVID-19 world, are there some other things to think about that can help us? So now, when we're in this shelter in place and don't go outside, stay at home, don't go outside. And I live in an apartment building. They shut down the workout room. So don't go to the workout room. Don't, see your friends. Don't hug anybody that you love unless they're in your same shelter. It's a challenge to think about how we can work within those circumstances to do all those things that improve sleep. And now it's nice that I think the lid's coming off a little bit on the don't leave your home piece of things. And we are able to go outside more. And so for our rhythms, for our body clock, daylight is a hugely important cue. And as we discussed, especially in the morning, if you can't get out, open those curtains, stick your head out the window. Don't hide from morning light. And the other thing to think about is putting some structure in your day, because I think that's been a challenge for a lot of people, is they're not getting up and going to work, or, they're not, and they're juggling not just their work at home maybe, but their kids' work. And so planning your day with some structured events in it that are structured in terms of timing can be important. So social activities. So if you have a good friend or loved one or a group of people that you like to be in touch with, schedule those Skype calls or Zoom calls, at 7 p.m., I'm going to talk to somebody every day. Or 10 p.m., I'm going to try and talk to someone. Try and get some physical activities going, whatever you can manage. I have a very small apartment, so walking around my coffee table gets old fast, but if I do it the same time every day, that will help a little bit. Meals are very important. Both activities, meals, and social events are known to be not as strong as light signals in controlling your clock, but have some impact on your clock timing. And feeding is one of the major ones. So again, plan to have your meals at the same time every day. And one of the tips, some of these are coming from Dr. Katie Sharkey, who's a dear friend and colleague. And this one, give your day strong beginnings and endings that are timed consistently, I think has become more important as we try to survive this COVID-19 change to our daily lives. So, okay, I'm not going to be up at 6 o'clock maybe, but I'm going to be up at 7:30 every day, and I'm going to get up and I'm going to move around, and I'm going to do, start my day strong, and I'm going to shut down my day and have that ending time planned. And maybe that's Alexa, good night.
Good night. talk to you tomorrow.
So your sleep environment, there's been, I think it becomes maybe more important to work on your environment, especially if your sleep is being challenged. So you may need to do something to make your window blinds, keep your room darker at night. There's this tip I saw recently that put duct tape over those LEDs that are on your, whatever devices you have in your room. Put your phone into night mode, turn off your media, as we talked about before, and you shouldn't be sleeping with lights on. But one of the things you need to be careful about, and this is one of those things that becomes more important the older an individual is, it's kind of like the same sort of vulnerabilities we have to COVID, we have to stumbling and hurting ourselves if we get up in the middle of the night and it's dark out. So, there are now these cool lights you can get that are movement sensitive that would turn on if you got up in the middle of the night. Optimal amount. So we talked a little bit about how much sleep you need, and we each need to try and figure that out. And I think for some people, this pandemic has given them the opportunity because they're no longer having to skimp on sleep on their work days. And so, a lot of us live on this, we'll sleep 6 hours on work nights and then sleep longer on weekends. And I think a lot of people now are just getting more sleep throughout the week. But what you don't want to do is go wild with this. And the worst thing probably is staying in bed too long, trying to see how long you can sleep. Because if you stay in bed too long, it actually defeats that process S and doesn't give you that sleep pressure to help you get better sleep. So for most people, 8 hours in bed is plenty. Again, as I say, if you're in bed longer trying to sleep, it can just make it worse. There's some folks who are saying a very brief nap in the middle of the day could be okay, but nap during COVID as well as before, probably one of the worst things to do is to nod off near bedtime. So sitting in front of your TV or reading your book, because that's where you really can crush that sleep pressure and make it hard to fall asleep at night. So a nap, 8 to 10 hours before bedtime isn't going to do too much damage to falling asleep. So what about your kids' sleep? So a lot of you are living in a household with kids. I think most people have gotten better at making this adjustment and have given up on that. Okay, we're going to pretend we're still going to school. You're going to get up at 5:30, just like you did when they were supposed to get. It's just, there's no sense, and the kids get it too, and try to keep that normal schedule. So let go. Because, if the school bell's not ringing, the kids don't need to get up early. I think that I've heard, chatter that middle schoolers and high schoolers, some of them are happier than they've been in a long, long time. Well, maybe since last summer, because their systems are set up to fall asleep later and to wake up later. So now they're living with a schedule that suits their clocks better, which isn't to say they should be staying up all night and sleeping in the daytime. They're still diurnal animals. So the more activity you get during the day, not in the couple of hours before bedtime, the more it will help your sleep. This is one that's come up that you hear about during COVID, is some people are treating their stress with alcohol. Alcohol just is not a way, it may help you with that immediate falling asleep, but then it's dreadful for your sleep. So try to be measured with that. Again, all these things that sometimes you get sucked into doing in the evening aren't going to help you sleep either. They may be good distractors, but they're not good for sleep. So, and that's, I think, how some people have been trying to manage their worries and anxieties. And, you know, this was a quote from an essay I read recently. 3 in the morning is a terrible time to calm yourself down. As we've said, your brain expects and desires and wants you to be asleep at that time, not solving problems. So, you know, you have your face mask for the daytime, wear your worry mask to try and protect your sleep. Don't watch the news before bedtime. Nothing is really changing, and it's not going to help you with your worries. If you wake in the middle of the night, you know what? Your problems pretty much are going to be able to wait. And it's hard to ignore them, and it's hard, especially when your brain just won't stop it going over them. But sometimes if you pull out a pad and pen and write down your worries, or write down what you think you might forget to do tomorrow, sometimes that can help you then put it aside and fall asleep. Again, I'm not a clinician. These are non-clinical tips, I guess. Speaking of tips, so Rachel Silverman sent me her contact information for her clinical offerings, and so she asked me to share them. And Katie Sharkey shared this website with me, and when I went to it, I thought, oh, should this be .com? No, it isn't .com, it's .co. And if you go there, it has state listings, and it has things that may be troubling you. And there's an alphabetical list. So I was looking for insomnia in the list, and there wasn't in the eyes. So then I just thought, okay, look for sleep. And where sleep should be, it says insomnia and sleep problems. So just a tip there. And again, it will find you local folks that you might go to or refer others to get some help if you're having challenges with your sleep. So I'll stop there, and I think there's time for questions.
If anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can type it into the chat box if that's easier. I have a question. What should we do if we wake up in the middle of the night because maybe we haven't done a good job of putting on the worry mask, and we start to think about work and responsibilities and problems? What's the best advice for how do we fall back to sleep? What I currently do is, if I struggle for a long time, I get up and I have a piece of toast, and that sometimes calms my thinking down. But is there a better way? What would you recommend?
Well, you know, the sleep docs who really do this therapy tell us, you know, your bed should be for sleeping and intimacy, and not for worrying or watching TV or, you know, other things. And so I think your strategy is, I don't know about the eating a piece of toast, but certainly the getting out of bed and doing something that's calming for you can help, because, you know, there are these associations our brain makes. And so if our brain associates lying in bed with worrying and getting upset, then, you know, it makes it that much harder to fall asleep. So that's part of the sort of what you would call the cognitive therapy approach to getting better sleep, is to really think about, what am I doing in my bed if it's not sleep conducive, then you probably shouldn't be doing it in your bed.
I have a message from Dr. David Dove. Thank you for the talk.
Oh, thank you for your kind words.
What could you give us an example of an ideal sleep hygiene routine? What should we be doing? You know, if we go to bed, let's say at 10 p.m., that's our bedtime. What are the last few hours of the day leading up to 10 p.m. ideally?
Well, I think you want to have your supper at a reasonable time. That's the same time every day, not too close to bedtime. So, 6 or 7. And part of that is if it's a family schedule and the kids are going to bed earlier, your meal times may be fixed as much by their schedules as by your schedule. And then do your evening activities, whether it's, playing games with your family or Skyping with your friends or paying your bills. But then if your bedtime is 10, by about 9 o'clock, you want to be thinking about shutting down all of those activities and dimming down the light and the noise and sort of easing your environment towards the sleep conducive environment. So not picking fights, not doing those things that turn your arousal levels up, because you need to be turning your arousal levels down. And different people find different things that help them with this wind down. For some, it's a shower or bath and that can be, it works. There are some physiological parts of that warming up your body before sleep that actually help with falling asleep. So there's some biology there. So, there's no magic that I'm aware of. I see that Rachel's on a guest. She might have other thoughts there. I mean, it's just most of us are pretty rational. And if and part of it is, if you're living with family members who are challenged by all of this and struggling and you're having to be their caretaker and they're winding you up, it's going to be harder for you and you may not be able to have that, lengthy wind down time before sleep. So as much as you can try to plan into your day, and you know what, stuff happens. And I guess one of the things that I think is important to remember is that stuff includes sleep. Sleep will happen. And it's not always something that's in your control. And you can do these sleep hygiene steps that can help maximize the quality of your sleep. But sometimes something's going to happen. But, the point is, don't panic about that. Sleep will happen the next time it has the opportunity. But I don't want that to be when you're driving your car.
Does anyone else have a question, comment? Feel free to unmute your microphone.
I think people are out exploring that zencare.co website.
Hi, this is Rachel Silberman.
Hi, Rachel.
And thank you very much, Dr. Carskadon. It's so great to see the overview again. And it's so helpful for people to have just an understanding of the biology and what the mechanisms are behind everything. I think as far as that nighttime routine question, sometimes I'll encourage people, if they have experienced helping children go to sleep and thinking about what's kind of soothing and down-regulating, for children. If you've ever had that responsibility of getting a young child ready for bed, you know, we want to kind of apply that same thinking to our own selves. So we want to do things that are, you know, that are down regulating as opposed to riling them up. So, you know, we need to kind of redefine for ourselves what the riling them up is. I also find that a lot of adults get caught up in electronics. And so sometimes having a timer to remind yourself to wind down and shut off, you know, Facebook and Instagram and that kind of stuff can be really helpful. Sometimes we lose track, our internal clock loses track in the evening, and we don't get that natural cue. And next thing we know, you know, we're knee deep way beyond the time that we intended. So having those warnings can be really helpful too.
Thank you, Rachel. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Carskadon, for giving us this really helpful information. And I found it to be very reassuring. And I really like some of the ideas you've provided, and Rachel as well. So thank you very much for that as well. To all of our participants in Rhode Island, is there anything the Mental Health Association can do to help you during this time? Is there a resource that would be helpful for you? You can feel free to chat it to me right now, or you can also email it to me at another time. But if nobody else has any questions, I will say thank you so much again. Dr. Carskadon, we're very grateful to have you here. Thank you so much for your time. And we have more workshops next week. You can go to the Mental Health Association of Rhode Island's website to see our offerings. And we look forward to seeing everyone very soon. Take care, everyone, and be well.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Very informative.
Sleep well.
Gonna try now.
Yes, yes.